Coming up on this WEBN special report, we go live from one of the world's most prestigious universities. You'll hear about the psychological pressures of learning in a competitive environment, and college students unite on Boston campuses to open up about struggles and loss, and to fight the stigma around suicide. And later, we'll look inside a local helpline that provides life-saving services to those hurting or grieving. This morning, I woke up, brushed my teeth, got dressed, and came to work. But for people who struggle with suicidal thoughts, starting a new day isn't always that simple, and it's not easy to talk about. Today, we're going to. We'll shed light on what it means to battle with suicidal ideation, and we'll look at ways of coping with it in this WEBN special report, Not Alone. I'm Ross Ketschke. Suicide. It's a word we'll be saying a lot in the next half hour. We're breaking the silence on what many consider to be a taboo topic because awareness is the first step to prevention. The National Institute of Mental Health defines suicide as when people direct violence at themselves with the intent to end their lives, and they die because of their actions. It defines suicidal ideation as thinking about, considering, or planning to end one's life. For many, the world seems too dark, too cold, and too lonely to live another day, and they're scared to talk about it for fear of being judged. Anyone could be silently suffering. It could be your teacher, your peer, or even your local firefighter, and they're all fighting a similar battle. In this program, you'll learn that support is available right in your backyard, and that no one is ever alone in their struggle. That's the premise of one local author's new book, Portraits of Resilience. Our reporter Rob Way is live at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. He talked with the author, Professor Daniel Jackson. Rob?
That's right, Ross. Jackson is a professor at MIT. In his new book, he talked to students and staff at the university about how they've coped with or overcome anxiety, depression, trauma, and other challenges.
Depression and anxiety are ubiquitous problems. They're just absolutely everywhere. And we'd had our own fair share of it at MIT. And I was looking around, like many of us, trying to figure out what we could do to address the problems of depression on campus. And it struck me that there was one group of people that we hadn't turned to, who were actually the people who had the most to teach us about depression, and those were the people who had actually suffered from it.
And since Jackson is a professor at MIT, he turned to his community to get those stories. One of them is from graduate student Mary Tellers, who suffers from PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
I always wonder if MIT's level of mental health, like mental illness, is higher because the people who are coming to MIT are sort of selected for this extreme brilliance and sort of like off the beaten path kind of life, and in other ways because of the pressures put on students at MIT. I don't think that it's one or the other. I think that it's both.
I think there's something about the pressure, undoubtedly, of the many places like MIT that is not conducive to having an easy and relaxed life. That probably increases incidence of depression. But that's not an MIT phenomenon.
But Jackson sees how MIT might be able to address it.
We can resist the temptation to be continually ramping everything up. You know, we always think it's great to have exciting new programs, and so we multiply programs and awards and internships and fellowships and workshops, and we allow people to take, heavier and heavier loads, and then we might even consider, offering more classes during inter-semester periods, and then we might even consider things like shortening the length of the degree. All of these for plausible purposes, maybe to reduce the cost of education, to allow students to finish sooner or whatever. But the net effect of all these things is that they ramp up the pressure.
And staff member Therese Henderson has a message for other members of the community.
I wanted to let students and other people know, the people who read the book, that even if there is a shame feeling about it, you can surmount that. Because look at me, I'm telling you my story, and I'm not ashamed to tell my story.
Professor Jackson told me that other students and staff have come to him and wanted to share their story, so a new book may be in the works soon enough. Reporting live in Cambridge for WEBN, I'm Rob Way.
Thanks, Rob. According to the latest data from the CDC, suicide is the second leading cause of death among college students in the United States. That means more young adults aged 18 to 24 die from suicide than all medical illnesses combined. That's what inspired the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention to create a student-led fundraising series. The Out of the Darkness campus walks are designed to engage youth and young adults in the fight to prevent suicide. Our reporter Chloe Thibault is live in Boston. She met with the walkers who are trying to change the conversation about mental health. Chloe?
Thanks, Ross. Students from Boston schools joined together on campuses to share their personal experiences with suicide and mental health issues. They wore beads like these to show that everyone is affected in some way.
Purple, gold, teal, red, green, silver, and blue. College students chose beads from these colorful piles to show how suicide has hit each of them close to home.
It really can affect anyone, and it does. And people don't realize it, but it's everywhere, and everybody has some sort of connection to it, which is why I really appreciate the beads, because it makes you feel like you are part of something helping the world, and everyone does have a connection to it, so it brings us together.
This camaraderie is especially important in stressful environments like universities.
College students are at a way increased risk of having mental health issues and of attempting suicide, so we definitely want to spread the word in this community specifically, because we are at an increased risk as college students, and we want to just make sure that people know that if they are struggling with these things, there are resources for them.
These activists took part in suicide prevention walks on their campuses to initiate dialogue about mental health.
At Northeastern, there's sort of a culture of silence around these issues, and there's a lot going on that we don't necessarily discuss openly, and we definitely want it's a big part of the recovery process for people to be able to talk about these issues and feel like there is a space for that, and we definitely want to provide that at Northeastern.
Michelle Lee has been involved in suicide awareness programs since her father killed himself when Michelle was just 14 years old. She sees inspiration in these young adults who are fighting for change.
I love working with colleges and high schools because I think that they just have they're aware of the problems, and I think being able to take part in a walk and things like that creates this kind of awareness for funds, but also awareness out in the community. Everyone today saw everyone in the common walking and kind of asking questions, what are you doing? And I think that creates a great awareness.
These demonstrations are part of the Out of the Darkness movement, an initiative to bring these sensitive topics to light.
Suicide prevention and mental illness, issues around mental illness are in the darkness, sort of shrouded in shadow, cast aside, not really discussed, and just because of stigma and taboo, things like that. And so what we're really trying to do is illuminate the issue, shine light on the issue, bring it out of the darkness, put it more in the public sphere, and bring more attention to the issues that we're talking about today.
Northeastern University students raised about $5,000 for this cause, and they still have a few months left to reach their goal of $8,000. Emerson College students raised over $16,000. Live in Boston, I'm Chloe Thibault, WEBN News.
Thanks, Chloe. One of the groups most at risk of suicide is LGBTQ+ youth. New research suggests that queer, transgendered, and questioning college students think about suicide 4 times more than heterosexual and non-transgendered students. I spoke with 2 LGBTQ students in Boston who explained the stress of anti-queer stigma and discrimination contribute to their mental illness.
I've been diagnosed with chronic major depression disorder.
I really think that if you're queer or if you're trans, that's a pre-existing mental health condition. You're pretty much guaranteed, if you are one of those people, you're pretty much guaranteed to have some kind of mental health illness.
And that led to a lot of internalizing. It led to a lot of emotions of self-hatred, just trying to find answers as to why do I feel this way, and being regularly forced to go to, religious meetings with my mom and having them say, like, people who have these kinds of feelings are sinners, and, you don't deserve to be loved a certain way, or you need to kind of suppress that.
Eventually, I ended up hurting myself pretty badly. I was bleeding a lot, and I had to go to the ER. And from there, that was sort of my first, because once you're in the ER, if they see that you've done something and it looks like you've done it to yourself, the first thing they ask is beyond, are you going to hurt anybody else? Or, are you going to, do you feel like you're a homicidal maniac? The second question is, do you want to hurt yourself? And I was like, well, clearly.
I just had no more will to live. I just didn't see the world as being one that was welcoming for me or accepting of me and my varying identities, and I was just thinking, well, what's the point of me sticking around?
And people think this is weird. People think that, like, when you say figure out, they think you mean choose, and it's not. It's just sort of like, I had been conditioned into this one gender role so hard that it took me a long time to sort of figure out how to break out of it. And then once I did, I was like, that's what it was. Now I know, and that's sort of like future vision of myself is what keeps me going. When I'm having like really depressed days or anything like that, I'm just like, well, why would you give up though? Like you've gone through so much to get here.
Things that I wish I had heard or someone had said to me, which is, you're not wrong for trying to live your life the way that feels best for you. People who have a problem with that are always going to have a problem, and it's their problem, it's not yours. Don't try to tailor yourself to what they want to see from you, because that's them, that's not you.
Basically, everybody's struggle is different, okay? And if you're, a queer person, you need to find somebody to talk to. Anybody, a friend, particularly, if you can, find a therapist, find someone at your school, but just start talking.
Coming up on this WEBN special report, Not Alone, a glimpse inside a local suicide helpline that provides call and text crisis services, and local firefighters help one another cope with the emotional tolls of their job. Stay with us. Welcome back to this WEBN special report, Not Alone. Every day, thousands of people in Massachusetts struggle with loneliness, depression, and suicidal thoughts. Samaritans, Inc. is a Boston-based nonprofit organization that works to prevent suicide and support those who have lost someone to suicide. Our reporter Javier Rodriguez visited the office.
Suicide is preventable. Unfortunately, there's a lot of stigma still associated with it. People are reluctant to ask for help, to seek treatment. But if we can be there to alleviate some of that and remove some of that stigma, that is a tremendous help in reducing the overall rate of suicide.
At Samaritans, they answer calls and texts on their helpline from people who are not only suicidal, but also people who are feeling sad or hopeless.
A lot of times people think to call a crisis line, you have to be standing on the ledge. And that's just simply not true. It's not true here. It's not true at any crisis hotline across the country. Most of the people who call us or text us they're lonely, they may have worn out their family and friends. They just really are looking for someone to connect with, to listen to them, to have that human connection.
This is where volunteers take calls and texts from the over 6,000 people that reach out monthly. They listen to those of all ages and backgrounds looking for support.
This is not counseling or therapy. These are volunteers who are offering, their genuine selves to another person who's in trouble and needs someone to listen to them. Our approach is not one of what's wrong with you. It's more of what happened to you. It's more of an even playing field. It's not the expert up here and the patient down here. It's a person in need and a volunteer.
The volunteers answering the phones are unpaid and work at Samaritans in hopes of making a difference in someone's life.
When you're sitting there at 2 or 3 in the morning helping someone who's struggling that night, and they reach a point where they tell you that yes, they'll talk to you again tomorrow, and when the conversation started that they were saying, I've called to say goodbye, and a couple hours later they're telling you they've decided to hang in there and talk with you again tomorrow. I mean, nothing's more rewarding than that.
They get anywhere between 5,000 to 6,000 phone calls a month, but the demand on their line is about 10,000 phone calls a month, so they are always seeking more volunteers.
The more volunteers we have, the more people we can serve. I think nothing is more heartbreaking to me that someone has tried to reach out and there wasn't immediate help available and that they had to call back later.
For WEBN News, I'm Javier Rodriguez.
Samaritans teaches its volunteers about self-awareness and personal resilience. The organization put together a Boston Marathon team to raise awareness and funds for suicide prevention. The runners proved that strengths in both body and mind are linked. Our reporter Jill Guerin met the runners who weathered the storm.
In the back of my head, I just kept thinking about how agonizing like their last moments were, and I was just, I needed to be strong because they no longer could be.
And that's the thought that kept Erin Rogers going as she ran the 122nd Boston Marathon in these conditions. She ran for the Samaritans nonprofit team.
It's bittersweet. The reason I'm running is because I lost two friends, or a family friend and, family to suicide, and part of me feels like I shouldn't have to be running for something like this because we shouldn't have lost them, but on the other hand, I'm proud to run in memory of them.
It was closure. It was a moment of freedom to some extent. Not that they'll ever get rid of the memory or the pain tied to the event.
Brian Anderson ran in memory of his mother, who committed suicide 8 years ago. He'd run the Boston Marathon before, but he says running for the Samaritans team was different.
Up to that point, it was always for certainly important causes and causes that I had a tie to, but nothing like the way that suicide has impacted my family and my life.
Anderson says crossing the finish line was emotional, but the most meaningful moment of his marathon experience actually happened the night before.
I had probably reached $8,500 worth of fundraising, but I had set my own personal goal for $10,000 for the organization. So at 7:30 on Sunday night, right before the race, I just made a quick Facebook post and thanked everyone who had supported me along the way and let them know tomorrow's the big day. But if everyone could just please consider taking one last look at making a donation, I'm really hoping to reach my $10,000 fundraising goal. Excuse me. And in 2.5 hours, we raised $2,500 and got to $11,000 raised. That's what this is about. Everyone asks, what was your time? How'd you do? And to me, none of that's relevant. It's about finding a cause, supporting it, knowing what the money's being used for, knowing that other people will have help.
It really takes a lot of strength to ask for help. It's not a weakness. It's very strong to reach out and ask for help. And I think that correlates with the strength that it takes to run a marathon.
If there's one message that anyone can get out of what, Samaritans and what we're trying to bring awareness to is just reach out. Anyone will help you, and they want to see you, feel better and, get to a better place. They obviously don't want to lose you. So I think the biggest thing is, you have cheerleaders, and they'll do whatever they can to, be beside you.
For those who struggle with suicidal thoughts, life can feel like running a marathon through wind and rain every day. But just like the runners who persevered through this finish line, empowered by the cheering spectators, you can also overcome feelings of helplessness with support from organizations like Samaritans. Reporting in Boston, I'm Jill Guerin.
For first responders, experiencing trauma is an unavoidable part of their work. Firefighting is one of the most dangerous and stressful jobs in the world. So it's no surprise that firefighters are at high risk for developing post-traumatic stress disorder and other mental illnesses. Our reporter Jessica Shorter-Bonney found out how one local fire department is combating mental health stigmas in the fire service.
It's impossible to do this job and escape without having some sort of post-traumatic stress.
Lieutenant Steve Oberg works for the Worcester Fire Department as the Employee Assistance Program's liaison. His job is to help firefighters who are struggling with an emotional issue related to the job.
I'm going to come and talk to you man to man or man to woman. It doesn't matter. I'm here to find out what's going on. I'm here to offer you some assistance and in complete anonymity. We want to help.
and this help seems desperately needed. In a recent survey done by NBC and the International Association of Firefighters, it was found that over 96% of firefighters have said they experience critical stress from their job, and that the majority of them have been left with unresolved emotional issues because of that stress. The survey also found that some of the most common issues that resulted from the emotional strain of the job have been sleep deprivation, substance abuse, and thoughts of suicide. After 30 years on the job, Lieutenant Oberg knows all too well about the toll it can take on people, but says the conversation around mental health has gotten better since he entered the service.
When I first started years ago, you didn't talk about anything really. You would talk about things, you'd have a bad incident or whatever, maybe around the kitchen table, you talked with your fellow firefighters or whatever. But if things were bothering people, you buried it. If you had issues, you were weak, or you had some sort of other problem, you didn't want to show that to people.
But now more firefighters are opening up about the struggles they faced while on duty and have become aware of the support services available to them.
We have a critical incident support team made up of Worcester firefighters. You know, there's no pressure. It's not like we're demanding people to do or talk or say anything, but just an awareness level that somebody's there. You can seek a little bit of help. What we do is not normal all the time.
In fact, it's this lack of normalcy that actually makes talking to fellow firefighters the best form of stress relief.
Kitchen table, we call it, around the kitchen table in the firehouse, is the place to do the most diffusing of anything. Air it out at the kitchen table. If you've had a bad shift, you've had a bad tour, you've had a bad incident, talking about it at the beginning is good, and then to keep going with that after the fact.
It was found that out of all the services offered to firefighters, peer support appears to have been the most successful, with an overwhelming 80% of firefighters saying they found it more helpful than other forms of support.
When you join this group and you become part of a family, brotherhood, sisterhood, is just enormous. I don't even have words to describe it.
Over time, Lieutenant Oberg hopes that as more and more of his firefighters seek the help they need, the public will become more aware of the unique set of challenges these brave men and women face every day.
We're a cross-section of society. Just because we're on the fire department doesn't mean we don't have all the same problems, especially outside of work, that everybody else in the world has. You know, none of us look at ourselves as being heroes. Look, I'm just a guy across the street that mows his lawn the same way and, you know, puts his pants on the same way as everybody else does. I just happen to do a job that may be dangerous every once in a while.
It may look like these firefighters training behind me are only learning physical skills, but they're actually also learning the even more crucial mental skills needed to meet the demands of their job. Reporting in Worcester, I'm Jessica Short-Turbani.
Understanding the issues around suicide and mental health is an important way to take part in suicide prevention. We now go to our in-studio correspondent, Catherine Lazowitz. She has more on how to recognize the risk factors and detect the warning signs of suicide. Catherine?
Thanks, Ross. There isn't one single cause of suicide, but it happens most often when stressors and health issues combine to create feelings of hopelessness and despair. The American Foundation for Suicide Prevention breaks down suicide risk factors into 3 major categories: health factors, environmental factors, and historical factors. People who have a mental health condition like depression, a substance abuse problem, or an anxiety disorder are more likely to try to take their own life. A chronic health issue can also increase that risk. People are also more at risk if they have access to lethal weapons like firearms and drugs, if they have prolonged stress like bullying or harassment, or if they have experienced a stressful life event like death, divorce, or job loss. Lastly, people with a history of suicide attempts, a family history of suicide, or a history of childhood abuse are at greater risk. Now, we can all take action to prevent suicide. One way you can help is by recognizing when a person in your life may be having suicidal thoughts. The AFSP breaks these warning signs down into 3 categories: talk, behavior, and mood. People who talk about killing themselves, feeling hopeless, having no reason to live, or being a burden to those around them are at risk. Behaviors like increased use of alcohol or drugs, withdrawing from activities, isolating from friends and family, sleeping too much or too little, and giving away prized possessions are also warning signs. Lastly, people who are considering suicide often display one or more of the following moods: depression, anxiety, loss of interest, irritability, and rage. I'll be back later in the show to talk about tools for coping with suicidal thoughts. Ross?
Thanks, Kath. Coming up on this WEBN special report, Not Alone. a local addiction treatment center takes a different approach to addressing substance abuse. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this WEBN special report, Not Alone. Addiction to drugs and alcohol is a mental illness, according to the National Institute of Mental Health. And many people who suffer from addiction are also diagnosed with other mental disorders like anxiety and depression. That's why a local treatment center is focusing on addressing patients' mental health issues while treating their addiction. Our reporter Christina Guessferd visited the facility and spoke with recovering addicts about physical and mental recovery.
I had a gun in my mouth, I've had a belt around my throat, thinking that that was the only way I was going to escape the grips of addiction. And I'm fortunate that I didn't go down that path, that wasn't the choice that I ended up making.
And making that choice to live and conquer addiction is what inspired Matt Ganem to co-found the Banyan Treatment Center in Massachusetts. As a recovering addict, Ganem knows fighting addiction is a twofold battle.
There's not too many people that just enjoy heroin to the point that they become an addict, they become homeless. I mean, most of the time it's childhood trauma, it's battling with depression, it's anxiety, it's untreated bipolar, among a variety of other, more severe mental health conditions. Until you even remove the drugs, you can't really treat, the clinical side, the mental health aspect of it with medications, if that's the case, or try to get to some of the roots of some of the trauma that happened.
That's why Ganem tackles his clients' mental health problems head on. He says making personal connections is what helps him save lives.
I got a chessboard on my desk. My door's always open. Get somebody to come in here, play chess, you get them to talk about what they're going through. You start talking strategy on chess, and somehow it turns into like a recovery lesson on sometimes you have to make these moves or sacrifice this to gain that.
And Ganem knows a lot about sacrifice. He structures the programs based on his own experiences.
And a lot of it is a cold, paperwork-driven, type of program where, we want people to be engaged and enjoy coming here, and that want to get their life back, that's willing to do different things. Like, hey, if this method isn't working for you, let's try this method. If that isn't, if it's more therapy, let's sit you with a clinician a couple times a week.
By taking that different approach and leading by example, Ganem shows his clients recovery is possible.
I couldn't be more grateful for the life that I live today. And my biggest hope is that as a group, that we can inspire people to want that, to strive for that type of life, and to give them the foundational blocks for a life like that.
In Wilmington, Christina Guessferd, WEBN News.
We now go back to our in-studio correspondent, Catherine Lazarowitz. She has more on tools for coping with suicidal thoughts. Catherine?
Thanks, Ross. If you or someone you know is in crisis, there are always options available to cope. Here are some of the ways to help you get through a crisis. First, find a therapist or support group. Speaking to someone can help you feel better and improve your mental health. Second, build a support network. You don't have to deal with suicidal thoughts on your own. People you can confide in provide much needed encouragement. Then, use that support network. Leaning on your network can get you through the most difficult times. And make a safety plan. A safety plan is designed to guide you through times when you feel like hurting yourself. This will help you recognize your personal warning signs, encourage you to use your own coping strategies, and ensure your environment is safe. If you or anyone you know is feeling suicidal, please know help is always available. You can call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at any time to speak to someone and get support. The number is 1-800-273-8255. Again, that's 1-800-273-8255.
Suicide. It's not easy to talk about, but that's why we did in today's program. Understanding suicide is a crucial step in preventing it. For more information, please visit afsp.org or suicidepreventionlifeline.org. And remember, you are never alone in your fight. Thank you for watching this WEBN special report, Not Alone. I'm Ross Ketschke.